I just have one thing to say. Hang on here.
And you ain't black.
I tell you what, if I had the talent of any one of these people, I'd be elected president by acclamation.
Might have some hard disagrees with Adam on this.
So if you're online and you see the phrase music theory, try replacing it with the phrase the harmonic style of 18th century European musicians. Here is an article that claims to explain the genius of Lady Gaga using the harmonic style of 18th century European musicians. The article then goes on to highlight her song Bad Romance's use of the raised leading tone in a minor key, which was very popular in 18th century Europe. Very cool. This is a class that you can take all about the harmonic style of 18th century European musicians, and the way that you can tell is by looking at the course catalog, which has a lot of tonal harmony in it. This is a thread on the electronic music producer Deadmau5's subreddit, which asks, does Joel use the harmonic style of 18th century European musicians?
I want to fight with him. He's kind of right. We're going to be kind of pedantic. Generally, instead of calling it history, we should call it European history from the 16th century onward. 95% of the history classes you're going to take in high school, unless you're taking AP history or until you get to college, right? Now, it's still history, but generally our history has a pretty narrow focus when it comes to like grade school and high school in the United States, probably in most of Europe as well, right? Generally, you're focusing on Middle Ages and onwards, like European history. 99% of the time. In Europe, 99% of the time. Most of the quote-unquote music theory you're going to hear about in school up to college is going to be like music theory from the 18th century onward in terms of like European harmony. That's true. Now, technically, music theory encompasses more than that. We can use it to describe even non-tempered systems, like systems that use totally different tunings and whatnot. But for most of the time when people talk about music theory, if they're, depending on how pretentious they're being, they probably are talking about like European harmonization, most likely, but... So I'll give it to him. We could fight a little bit pedantically, but generally he's probably correct.
I think I'm more tech than, Mozart.
Need help understanding how this progression fits in with the harmonic style of 18th century European musicians? How many of you guys know the harmonic style of 18th century European musicians? Did the Beatles know much about the harmonic style of 18th century European musicians? Etc., etc. You get the point. We see this all the time in popular media. We've been trained to see the two of them as the same thing, even though the analytical models, the music theory, that might help in understanding the music of Beethoven might not help in understanding rock music, or country, or R&B, or electronic dance music, or any of the styles of music that you, the person watching this video, are statistically more likely to listen to and make part of your life. What most people think of as music theory actually does a pretty bad job of describing musical practice in most styles of music. This has kind of been used as a means of comparing all music from all people across the globe to the stylistic practice of a select few musicians. These guys versus, say, I don't know. These guys. So, can you spot the difference between the tonal composers on the left and the tonal composers on the right?
The guys on the right have way better wigs.
That's right. The ones on the left are American. The ones on the right are German. And they clearly wrote the better music, which is why we study them. They clearly have the superior music. They clearly have a superior culture. They are individuals of genius who rise above the degenerate masses and their degenerate music. They are... Part 1. The white racial frame of music theory.
This video would trigger the fuck out of Stryker.
Why are you attacking me personally?
I had a conversation with a guy about music theory a long time ago, and he brought up something about older music. One was music made for the purposes of like royal entertainment, or like made to be like elite music.
Ultimate irony of this entire last section about how elites are dictating what we want to listen to on the radio, when you're citing classical composers that literally these operas that you're talking about were commissioned by literal elites, literal royalty and noblemen for them to be written and played. And you're talking, like, if anybody here is pushing a message from the elites, it would be somebody telling us to listen to an opera that a fucking king or a baron like literally commissioned from somebody to write for them.
and the other was made like for popular music. And almost all of the music that we listen to from the past is all music that is like literally commissioned for, or commissioned by and made for like kings or whatever. Wasn't one like academic? Yeah, there was a name for it. I don't remember it. There were two different terms that this guy's used, and I don't remember what they were. Oh, vernacular and cultivated. Wait, was that it? I don't think that was it. That might have been it. But like a lot of the music we listened to in the past was like literally by like the kings, like musicians and shit, would like commission for like fancy choirs or fancy operas or whatever, rather than just stuff written by people that were having fun with it and everything. And we tend to compare that type of music to cultivated versus folk music. That might have been it. We tend to compare that like highly commissioned music to today's like standard entertainment music, and it's not really a fair comparison.
Hi, my name is Philip Ewell. I am an associate professor of music theory at Hunter College here in New York City.
Dr. Ewell gave the keynote speech at the annual Society for Music Theory conference.
Our white racial frame believes that the music and music theories of white persons represent the best framework for music theory.
It's part of everything that we do, white racial framing in music. All of the materials that we use in our music theory classes, for sure, are so deeply indebted to whiteness.
In his paper, The White Racial Frame of Music Theory, Dr. Ewell says that music theory can be seen as a racial ideology in which the views and ideas of white persons are held to be more significant than the views and ideas of non-whites. So to try and figure out why American music theory is not built around these American composers, we're going to focus on just the music. And we already kind of have done that. We saw how music theory in popular culture can simply just mean the harmonic style of 18th century European musicians. And there are some musical elements which are unique to that style that are not shared in other styles, which are oddly prioritized. Figured bass is a system where numbers indicate intervals and chromatic alterations above bass notes. It's kind of like a 17th century shorthand, like chord symbols, a means of getting by on the gig. Musicians would read off of figured bass charts and improvise their parts, which was a practice called basso continuo, or simply continuo.
And as a cellist,
Please explain why you laugh. Sorry, because I'm being a pretentious dipshit. A lot of times you'll be given like different like things in class to like, here's a figured bass thing, fill in like the correct notes, or here's like this, you need to fill in this. It reminded me of like a really common exercise you're given. I'm just being a dipshit. Sorry.
played a lot of continuo with some really good Baroque groups. Figured bass is something I live and breathe. When we think about having it in our music theory textbooks, are you kidding me?
Here is a music theory textbook from 1725, Johann Fuchs's Gradus ad Parnassum, which honestly does not look that much different from a textbook from 2011, Harmony and Voice Leading by Aldwer and Schachter. Nothing has really changed in 300 years, even though music has changed quite a lot.
Nikolai Rimsky-Korsakov wrote a harmony textbook, the most famous harmony textbook ever written in Russia, probably. And he said, you know what, music is so crazy these days, I'm not even going to put figured bass in here because it's kind of a waste of time. It's outdated. We don't need it anymore. That was 1884.
Seriously, check this out.
I was going to say true. I don't know. If you're reading charts, you're reading, Zane would know this, right? You get like a lead sheet that'll give you like chords or whatever. But man, unless someone out there wants to correct me, I don't think you're ever going to be given, a modern musician is ever going to be given like a figured bass chart. I don't even know if those exist.
This is what Rimsky-Korsakov, the Flight of the Bumblebee guy, wrote. In most of the existing manuals of harmony, we find rules for reading the now obsolete figured bass, but little or no practical advice for harmonizing melodies or selecting chords. 140 years ago, I mean, might as well be explaining this book or this book or this book. Like, nothing has changed in 140 years.
We don't have to perpetrate a system which is, once you actually look at it, kind of ridiculous.
Figured bass is totally useless in understanding any kind of music that isn't Western or tonal. Instead, it's a tool designed to understand the style of music from one kind of people.
I now refer to it as yet another method that the white racial frame of music theory can police and enforce whiteness. They'll never say that. What they'll say is, oh, but it's historical and it can help with other things. There's a reason that they're going to give for everything, for keeping things the way.
The only reason you would ever learn about this stuff is because it is historical. But like, I don't think it's bad to learn historical things. Just like be aware that their usefulness is incredibly limited.
They are.
That's how it's justified anyway in the course catalog for AP AP harmonic style of 18th century European musician. So let's say that you were enrolled in AP Spanish, And the way that you were taught Spanish in this course was by studying 300-year-old Spanish grammar. Now, studying these archaic tenses might be interesting. It's definitely historical. The way that they spoke Spanish back then definitely has influenced the way that Spanish is spoken around the world. And I don't know, if you already know a little bit of Spanish, maybe it might be useful for understanding Don Quixote or whatever, but is it useful? Is it practical for having conversations in Spanish in everyday life? Of course not. You might want to think about, in this entirely hypothetical scenario involving Spanish, why that practicality of having conversations in Spanish with cultures around the world is being sacrificed in the name.
Thank you, Steven.
I don't know how much I would agree with this.
Hi.
So language is something that is ever evolving, and language is more of a descriptive thing than a prescriptive thing, and language is something that is constantly in your face, is in its most modern form, always and forever and always. Nobody practices like ancient forms of language, although you could, right? Some people learn Latin or whatever. Whereas with music theory, I feel like it, in a way, like maybe learning some things like figured bass is kind of silly, but like learning like some fundamental theory, even if it's 18th century harmony, kind of builds onto other things, no? It's almost like saying like, why would I learn like multiplication when there are so many newer forms of math? Like multiplication was invented, I don't even know, a long fucking time ago. Like you would still learn all the fundamental forms of math before you build on higher stuff. Is 18th century music theory or harmonization a good place to start though? I'm not sure. I don't know, maybe not. Does it give you a good insight into like most of the worlds of music today since America exports?
Name of 300-year-old European Spanish grammar.
What they are way more loath to acknowledge is the race, the whiteness behind it, and how that actually plays into their own thinking about this very history that we're talking about. When you think about the country, the United States, and you think about how structural race has always been, it wouldn't make any sense at all if a musical way, a methodology for how we can envision and teach and experience music were not white racially framed as well in a country that itself is white racially framed. People are loath to admit that any culture with a music, which is every culture, has not only a rich musical tradition, but a rich music theoretical tradition.
Like I've heard of a lot of Asian musics that they use a completely different tonal system. I've heard of a lot of African musics that the polyrhythmic arrangements that they pass down from tribe to tribe were like incredibly fucking intricate, took a lifetime to learn sometimes. Like microtonal systems from Arabic music and shit, like.
Well then, welcome to this episode of the Basic Theory of Indian Music with me, Anuja Kamat.
Part 2 minor. You know there's other music theory, right? Anuja Kamat is a young singer that has a fantastic YouTube channel that goes over the basics of North Indian classical music, the concepts necessary to perform it, and just generally its vibe. She covers fairly technical things from tuning and temperament.
Each swara has a range of frequencies to itself in which it can operate. This range is called swara kshetra.
To ornamentation.
Let me introduce you to the concept of zamzama. This is found a lot in Maharashtrian and Punjabi folk songs.
To rhythm.
Tal is made up of specific syllables and specific beats. Lay is the distance between each beat.
And of course the intricacies of melody as expressed through rag, or ragas, if you're Anglo like me.
Rag means a melody with...
Do you think it's fair to say that the AP Music rubric should probably be sure to include a unit on explicitly non-Western music and some of their theories, just to give students a sense that there are other things out there besides Western music? Maybe. AP Music theory is exclusively like pre-romantic theory. I took AP Theory 1 and 2, unless there's an AP Theory 3 and 4 class, but I'm pretty sure my AP Theory 1 and 2 class was exclusively like pre-romantic, very, very basic like European harmony. That's what I remember at least. I don't even know if you'd have time to cover anything else in that class. Maybe they should just rename it to that, right? 18th century harmonization or 18th century harmony, or more aptly, what is the dominant 7? How do we get there? How do we go away from it? Because that's basically all you learn for like, yeah.
Which is used to express a feeling.
The basic structure of what I would call the major scale is the same in North Indian music.
Same is applicable for a Western song.
And so Anuja is able to sing Western songs using Indian solfege.
I have died every day waiting for you. Ga pa ga dha pa re sa.
All of the subjects that she covers have rough parallels in Western music theory. She often does cross-cultural comparisons, which serve to highlight the similarities as well as the differences between Western music and North Indian classical music.
The phrase "Mere ga" forms the identity of Yaman. So instead of taking sa re ga ma pa, you take mere ga ma pa. Every rag has a chalan. There are rules when it comes to combination of notes. For Western music students, this is exactly the difference between the Western concept of scale or mode and the Indian concept of rag.
So, Anuja is using Western theory as a foil to North Indian theory, as a means of understanding both of them a little bit better. That's something that we just don't do in the West. Like, even if you are a trained musician, chances are the past 2 minutes of information has been completely new to you.
Me introduce.
Man, is that really true? I feel like I went to the University of Nebraska. There's no way that I have like an exceptional theory course, but I feel like I've heard what did I hear in my classroom versus what did I hear on my own? I feel like I've heard so much about like there are microtonal systems, there's no way. Like once you escape the Romantic period, once you get into Impressionism and then you branch out from there, you must have heard about other things because people are desperate. People were desperate in the 1900s to find like new musical ideas. How could you not? How could you not have heard about like alternate tuning systems, about non-just tempered systems, about microtonal systems, about all sorts of other random pentatonic scales, about all sorts of other instruments? But do you know the specific microtonal systems? Isn't that the point he's going for? I mean, I don't know him personally, but that's because specific microtonal systems don't really intersect with the music that we have today. Like it's very rare to hear like microtonal stuff in Western music or in any popular music today, at least it's being exported from America or Europe. Not to say that it would be impossible to. It's just very strange. I think the most popular example of a microtonal anything I ever heard of was this melody is like is I don't think this is actually within the even tempered. I don't know if that would actually count as like but yeah. 20th century art music, jazz, popular music, and the music of non-Western cultures is a core part of my AP music theory class. Unless AP theory has changed significantly in the past 10 years, I don't know. I got a 5 on both halves of my theory exam, and I've never heard of those things in a high school class music theory. I took AP theory 1 and 2. There was singing, and then there was writing, and then there was dictation. We never studied anything even remotely contemporary. I have no idea I've never heard of that in my life. But maybe the AP theory curriculum is way different now. Maybe, I don't know. They definitely have made things more multicultural. It's possible, actually. I graduated in 2007. Maybe things have gotten a lot different. Actually, we can just look at the curriculum. It's AP shit. You're right. It should be online. Identifying features of pitch, interval, scales and keys, chords, meter, rhythm, and other musical concepts and performed and notated. This is all going to be like European-centered. Notating music you hear. That's dictation. Singing, a notated melody and sight. That's your sight singing. Completing music based on cues. Following common practice style. This is going to be like a writing test where you'd be given like a figured bass or something like that, I think. Is this AP 1 and 2? Or is this just 1? Because this looks exactly like what I did in... this is exactly what I did in high school. There is no 1 and 2 anymore? Oh, is it just the same? Destiny, no literally nothing about music theory, but isn't at the end of this the point of the video that Western music theory seems narrow and should expand? Well, yeah, but like... I don't think it's bad to start learning with Western theory. I don't think that's necessarily horrible. But like, we should be aware that there are other cultures and other types of music, of course, too.
You to the concept of zamzama.
What if that's something that we did, though? What if that cross-cultural relationship was kind of built into the way that we learned music theory?
Approach a music theory textbook the way that they all more or less start. They talk about rhythm and meter and pitch and scale. You can begin by putting out music theory and talk about Asiatic or African or Middle East. You can talk about the Americas, South America, ideas that came from all over the planet in terms of pitch, rhythm, meter, and probably most importantly, scale. Ragas and maqams that immediately come to mind. And then you could pivot into a sections of the music theory that you and I were taught. So instead of having it be 50 examples by Bach, why not have 2 examples by Bach?
I love me some Bach. Bach is awesome. But he was a relatively obscure composer in his day and rarely performed in the years after his death. It was only through the efforts of people like Felix Mendelssohn that his music kind of became the staple of the repertoire. That archival work necessary to preserve the legacy of the few people of color and women working within European music at the time just never happened.
Why not have a woman composer in your example from 1700? Why not have a POC if you have a Renaissance example?
And so partially as a result, we have a very limited and monochromatic canon.
I might be showing my own racial ignorance, but given how elitist a lot of the higher level like compositions were at the time, how many persons of color wrote music for like large royal audiences or whatever, or operas in like the 18th, 19th century? It might have happened a lot. I just haven't. I feel like if they exist, I feel like there's literally going to be like 1 or 2 of them. He gives some examples. Okay, yeah, maybe he will, yeah. Just because of how racist people were at the time, it seems hard to believe that they would have embraced music written by people of color.
Right there on page 152, boom, you got an example by Beethoven. Why not? He deserves a seat at the table. He wasn't a bad composer. As I said in my blog, he was an above-average composer. By golly, happy to play him, happy to hear him. I don't have a problem with Beethoven. I have a problem with what happened after he died in 1827.
In his article on the composer Florence Price, a black woman, the classical music critic Alex Ross warns,
reducing music history to a pageant of masters is, at bottom, lazy. We stick with the known in order to avoid the hard work of exploring the unknown.
What we've done.
True. AP Music Theory 2007, free response questions. Oh, we would have to have the musical things to do this. Oh, here's figured bass.
What we've done is we've taken musical examples that represent probably not even 0.1% of the world's music. We have claimed that it is music theory, not Western, not white music theory, not even Western music theory for music, kind of for the world, right? I mean, that's just so absolutely illogical. It doesn't make any sense at all. A 5/7 going to 1, fine. The 7th goes down by a step, sure. And you actually contextualize it and you have other music. Oh yeah, do you remember the raga we studied in chapter 2? Let's think about it now in relation to this piece by a Renaissance composer, maybe Lusitano, who was mixed race like me.
why does Anuja singing the rag Shuddha Kalyan sound similar to Kathleen Battle singing Xavier Montsalvage's song Ninge Ninge?
Adam Neely is canceled if this video at any point tries to convince us that fucking Yoko Kanno is singing real music, okay? I swear to fucking God. Do you actually think any other culture in the world, such as Asia or Africa, learn anything but their music other than in advanced chord? Oh wait, I'm sorry, Yoko Ono, not Yoko Kanno. Yoko Kanno is amazing at music, my bad. Actually, it wouldn't surprise me because Western culture is like so predominant across the world that it wouldn't surprise me if like other countries learn Western culture sometimes even before their own when it comes to things like art. That actually wouldn't surprise me, it's possible.
These two examples come from different cultures and so use different musical theory, but they arrive at a similar sounding kind of melody. They have the same scale degrees, or swara. In the West we would say do, la, sol, mi, and in India you'd say sa, da, pa, ga. And they both use the ornamentation of portamento, or meaned, that bending, sliding effect.
Meaned is nothing but a glide, a smooth glide from one note to the other.
Western theory would probably consider these notes a subset of the major pentatonic scale, but Rag Shuddha Kalyan is a little bit more specific. The meaned, that bending, is actually an integral part of the rag itself.
For example, Rag Shuddha Kalyan. It has meaned from sa to dha and pa to ga. That is the essential identity of Rag Shuddha Kalyan. So, sa dha pa ga.
Portamento is more an expressive technique in the West. It's not quite as foundational. You can have the pentatonic scale without the In traditional North Indian classical music, different rags are associated with different times of the day, and Shuddha Kalyan is an evening rag. Ninge Ninge is a lullaby, and lullabies are traditionally sung in the evening, although the pentatonic scale doesn't really have that kind of temporal relationship. In the West, scales don't have to be performed at certain times of day, but that is kind of an interesting coincidence.
Many different peoples have taken the idea of rhythm and meter and pitch and scale, for example, and done many different things with it. And you fold in the idea of Western tonality as one of those things, which it is. And it has been influenced by all of those things, and vice versa. There's no question about that. All of a sudden, you just get a beautifully contextualized picture of music and music theory. Western music theory will continue to be part of the curricula, as it should be, because it is such an integral part of the American musical experience.
It really comes down to a matter of perspective. Perspective aids in understanding. And even within the Western canon, we generally have only looked at music from this one perspective, when there are in fact many.
Why don't we learn about alternative Swahili numbers in grade 1? I'm literally shaking. So when it comes to art, especially as a young person, it is incredibly important to have as diverse an exposure to art as possible, because oftentimes it's very, very hard to overcome later in life intolerances or biases or perspective locks that you get at an early age. So for instance, one thing that psychologists have noted is that we tend to develop a special affinity for music that I think we listen to from the ages of 15 to 20. That's why, like, if you take somebody like me, is whatever I think about music, if you play me some shit that sounds like fucking Breaking Benjamin or Linkin Park, I'm probably going to jive with it at least a little bit, just because that type of shit is so heavily ingrained in my mind from that like really important developmental period. Like, I'm going to be way more favorable towards even the shittiest types of that music. If you play me fucking Shinedown or Trapped or whatever's playing on V-Man stream. Yeah. Are you talking about art in general, like music and drawing and all other? Yeah, any type of art. It's really, really, really good to have. You're a fucking statistician. It's really good to have an open mind when it comes to art, because like the last thing that you want, and I'm not saying this because fuck diversity. I don't care about other cultures and other people, and fuck black people and Asian people and white people. I don't give fuck all that. Okay, I'm not. This isn't like a diversity is our strength argument. This is just like for your own personal amusement, of your own personal enjoyment. It behooves you to learn about other cultures and other musics and other arts, because you're missing stuff. You personally are missing out on some life enrichment by having a closed mind and only listening to music or art or photography or film or whatever from one hyper specific type of thing. And I mean, I'm not saying this like I am I'm not saying this like I'm an arbiter of like all things. Like I'm locked in my own ways too, to some extent. Now that doesn't mean I don't have an open mind towards anything. But like for instance, like apparently in Indian movies, it's not uncommon to have like a narrator guy that like is watching the movie with you and commenting on it as it's happening. Like even if it's not like a comedy movie, if it's like an action, apparently that's like a thing. Can anybody tell me if that's right or wrong? I've read that a couple times. Is that in Uganda, not in Indian? Oh, it might not be Indian. I'm sorry, it might be a different country.
Watching this. Expect the unexpected. Rapid gunfire. Pound. Super deadly here. One hell of a movie.
But like, it sounds really dumb. Okay, yeah, so that's what I'm saying. When you say sounds dumb, so when you say that sounds dumb for art, what you're actually saying is I can't conceive of something that exists outside of the art that I'm comfortable with, right? Like that's like there might be things that you hear, or there might be things that other cultures do that on first glance it seems like really stupid, but there might be a reason for it. Yeah, I don't know. Like that's like just something to consider, you know. You don't want to. It sounds like telling, not showing. I'm sorry. I'm explaining this poorly. When I'm talking about like narrating, I don't mean that he's like literally giving a lot of exposition. I mean like the guy's like reacting to what's on screen, like, whoa, that was a big explosion, right? Blah, blah, like shit like that. Like some shit that you would never see like in a Western film. But yeah. What's the most out of the ordinary / mainstream film you've seen? What is the most out of the ordinary mainstream? Fuck, Bella used to recommend me weird films to watch because she's like a massive fucking film snob. And I watched one film and I fucking hated it. But I'll try it. I'll give anything. It was a Japanese film. Was it a samurai film? No, it was like a guy and his like younger brother. No one, hold on. I don't even know if this is obscure or what. Oh, God. Oh, Mishima Life in 4 chapters. How is that mainstream? He said non-mainstream. I'm talking non-mainstream. But anyway, yeah. You should diversify your taste in media and art. Not you don't. It doesn't have to be an SJW agenda or whatever. You should just do it for yourself. Like you should always be open to, yeah.
George Russell is a teacher as well as a composer. You were associated specifically with adventures in tonality.
George Russell was a mixed-race jazz musician who wrote a very influential jazz education method called the Lydian chromatic concept, otherwise known as
The Lydian concept of tonal organization. This I think you must explain.
There are essentially two kinds of tonal gravity. Vertical, that is tonal gravity inferred by the chord, where the chord infers the tonic, and horizontal tonal gravity inferred by the scale, for instance, a blues scale.
His New York Times obituary describes it as
a way for jazz musicians to improvise in any key on any chord without sacrificing the music's blues roots.
His system does not use the major scale as the primary method of organizing harmony, and instead uses the Lydian scale, which ended up being very influential on Miles Davis with his modal jazz approach on Kind of Blue, which was the greatest selling jazz record of all time. His ideas of the Lydian chromatic concept have gained traction at some universities, like New England Conservatory, for example, but jazz in general has a long tradition of non-white theorist educators who have attempted to codify the language of bebop, like David Baker, for example, and, of course, the absolute legend himself, Barry Harris.
I borrowed the diminished notes. Now watch.
Barry Harris is famous for his work with what some people call the bebop scale, or the major scale with an added sharp 5, but what he calls the 6th diminished scale.
Tomorrow, everybody should know all the 6 diminished scales. But see, diminished notes are weird notes. They say, move me somewhere.
Yeah.
And they really do. They say, move me.
His approach to tonal harmony is both idiosyncratic and also incredibly useful for jazz improvisers and anybody who wants to improvise within tonal harmony.
When you hit the major 7, watch. Now, we think of that as a complete chord, but really that chord is saying, that's what it says. See, a major 7th really is a 6 with 1 diminished note.
George Russell and Barry Harris developed their systems for jazz improvisers. But since jazz harmony is largely tonal, as well as a lot of European classical music, there is no reason why you couldn't simply adopt their systems to look at the music of Chopin, or Beethoven, or Brahms, or Mahler, or any 19th century European classical composer. It's just that nobody has done that before. And honestly, to me, it just makes a lot more sense to analyze Chopin through the 6th diminished scale than it does through figured bass.
We've only seen...
I don't know if that comparison makes sense, and I don't even know if that would necessarily be true. I think that, like, the rules of 18th century harmonic language were being discovered, but I think that if you look at 18th century and beyond harmonic language through, like, a paradigm that was created by those composers, that seems like the most reasonable way to make sense of their music, rather than looking at it through something more contemporary. No, I don't know if I'm buying that one or not. But
music from this angle, and it's been a white angle, and it's been a male angle, and together, not or, but white and male. And we've completely put everything else out. We've excluded everybody else. I mean, nobody should really sit there and say that this didn't happen. That's just what music theory is.
One very interesting exception to this is in Russian music theory, where there are actually a number of female perspectives.
The other music theorist is Valentina Khalopova. She's a good friend of Sofia Gubaidulina.
This is kind of a holdover from Soviet practice, which saw culture, like music, as more of a feminine activity, and so there is a long tradition of Russian female music theorists.
Gubaidulina, a contemporary composer, and her friend Khalopova came up with a way of analyzing her music, and she called it a parameter complex. And she had different categories of ways of grouping together sounds, how you articulate sounds, dynamics, and other methods. 5 ways of doing so.
In Halopova's theory, any musical elements can either be consonant or dissonant. So staccato, playing the notes short, might be a dissonant expression parameter, versus legato, playing them long and connected, that might be a consonant expression parameter. This is kind of a strange idea, thinking about articulation, how you physically play your instrument in terms of consonance and dissonance, but if you really think about it, there might be something to that.
She talked about it with respect to Gubaidulina, But you could easily expand that and just begin to look at all kinds of 20th century significant composers.
But the first thing to acknowledge is that music theory has a perspective to begin with, and that is actually kind of hard to wrap your head around if you're not used to it. So you remember when we listened to Ninge Ninge and compared it to Rag Shuddha Kalyan like 5 minutes ago?
Yeah.
Good times. Acoustically, the melodies were similar, but there were two different music theories behind the performances. So yeah, you could say that Anuja was singing a descending major pentatonic scale, but that makes about as much sense as saying Kathleen Battle was singing the descending form of Rag Shuddha Kalyan. There is definitely something that gets lost in translation there, the same way when you translate something from English to Hindi, for example. Spoken language is not universal, and neither is music. Part 4, Major 7. Music is not a universal.
Now hold on, Donald.
There's this deep sense that music is somehow above culture.
You like music, don't you?
That music is transcendent, like mathematics. It's universal. Math is math.
Math is math.
Music is music.
Let's go to ancient Greece, to the time of Pythagoras.
Pythagoras is widely hailed in popular culture as the father of both mathematics as well as music.
Mathematics and music?
Music was taught as part of the quadrivium in medieval Europe, alongside astronomy, geometry, and mathematics. Music was number in time, geometry was number in space, and astronomy was number in space and time. That makes a kind of sense, right? Or at least that's how Europeans have traditionally thought of it. There was this concentrated push in 1960s Cold War America to make the language of music theory more like a hard science and less like an art, to return it to the mathematical purity of the quadrivium.
From this harmony in numbers developed the musical scale of today.
Composer-theorist Milton Babbitt would try and make testable statements about musical compositions, and Benjamin Boritz took that a step further and attempted to use formal logic to make meaningful musical statements. Not sure if he succeeded, but that does look impressive, I guess.
The Pythagoreans, with their mathematical formula, came the basis of our music of today.
The push to make music theory more and more objective had the effect of erasing any trace that it ever had a white European cultural perspective, because, after all, how can mathematics have a cultural perspective? It's just math.
Math is math. People who want to believe in race neutrality, they want to believe in a colorblind society. Why do you always have to make it about race? Stop talking about race so much. It's not about race, it's just about good music. There's only two kinds of music, good music and bad music.
That is kind of impossible to do because different cultures, ethnicities, and races might value different things in music and also might not agree on what music actually is. Dr. Kofi Agawu points this out in his paper on the West African bell pattern. Imagine, if you will, a New World Order in which African approaches to rhythm pedagogy predominated in the American Academy. No one would be granted a music degree who could not dance. So, yeah, I certainly would not be able to graduate from this academy. It feels kind of off, right? But for a West African musician, that might just be kind of common sense. Dance is essential for understanding the layered metric structure of many African styles, and it can also help with performance. This is backed by neuroscience. Studies show that body awareness and movement is essential for how all humans perceive metric structures. Embodied cognition of music is at the very foundation of rhythmic and musical understanding.
I had a really interesting argument with my aunt, actually, like 5 years ago over this, where my aunt said that she didn't think that people were really into music if they couldn't dance. And she kind of gave an argument similar to this. My aunt is Cuban. I don't know if Hispanic people feel differently about it or not. I don't know if Cuban counts as Hispanic, actually. I've heard people argue back and forth. But yeah, it was an interesting argument. I disagreed with her, but I understood where she was coming from, that there's a different level of engagement with music when you're like dancing to it, you feel in your body, versus somebody that maybe is kind of like cold or robotic and sits there and like performs a piece, like reciting a piece or whatever. I can understand this argument for sure. For me personally, my hot take is I don't consider you a real musician if you can't sing. Although that's probably not a hot take. I think any good musician would understand that there needs to be some degree of like internalization of pitch. Like when I say sing also, I'm not saying that like you have to be like a good singer, but like you should be able to produce the notes with your voice you're trying to produce on an instrument. You should be able to do that. If you can't do that, your fingers are moving, but your brain is not engaged in what you're doing.
Standing in humans, so why wouldn't dance be required of every musician? Like, seriously, why don't we do that? Philosopher Robin James calls...
When When I say sing, I just mean like you should be able to sing like pitches.
Genius.
So like given like this, you should be able to like find pitches with your voice. Do that should be E flat. Like you should be able, you have to be. If I ask you, if I give you a note and I tell you to like sing an interval and you can't do it, like, well, what are you even doing? Like you have to know this. Like it's your language, right? Yeah. Okay, we're done. But anyway, that's what I'm saying. I'm not saying you have to be a good singer, but like it should be in there. You should have it in there somewhere with you.
It's the intentional separation of analysis from culture, the epistemology of ignorance.
The practice that naturalizes the common sense intuition of the most privileged members of society as objective knowledge.
We see the separation of analysis and culture in popular media all the time. Like, for example, when conservative pundit Ben Shapiro explains why, in his estimation...
But you don't need voice to have it in there, right? No, you absolutely need voice. If you can't sing it, if you can't sing it, then you're not thinking it. Okay, your voice and your brain are connected. We talk to each other all the time. You have a kinesthetic awareness of your vocal cords, the same way that like it would be like saying, can you be a football player? And you're like, yeah, and it's like, can you throw a ball? And it's like, well, I can throw a ball up here in my head, but I can't do it with my arms. Like, well, what do you mean? So then you can't. Like, if you can think of a pitch in your head, you should be able to produce it with your vocal cords. If you can't, if there's a disconnect there, no way are you going to be able to understand that and fully have it like existing like on your fingers or vocalized in like an instrument or whatever. Yeah. What the fuck is this analogy? The analogy fits perfectly. If somebody told you they were good at sports and you're like, really? Like, yeah, and they're like, yeah, I can dunk. And it's like, wow, really? Show me. Like, well, no, I can think about dunking in here, but I can't like actually dunk. But I can do it in my brain. Like, what the fuck does that mean? Like, if you've internalized a song, a piece that you're performing, then you should be able to sing the notes within reason, obviously. Now, if you're playing like a fucking piano piece, I don't expect you to sing the high note. Like, you don't have to have a 17 octave range or whatever. But
hip hop is not music.
In my view, and the view of my music theorist father, who went to music school, there are three elements to music. There is harmony, there is melody, and there is rhythm.
Okay. Oh God! I don't know why, but conservatives don't know anything about art ever. Just don't ever talk. Even listen, I implore you. I know I have a few new conservative fans out there maybe that like are listening because you listen to me shit on people over the call or whatever. Listen to me. If you only take one thing away from this stream, as somebody that went to school for music, please do not ever listen to conservatives about anything related to art because they don't understand art at all. They really don't. I don't know why. Even when it comes to like. Even when it comes to 18th century art that they pretend to enjoy, they don't. No conservative goes home and turns on fucking Bach or Beethoven. It's just not true, okay? Don't ever listen to conservatives talk about art because they are...
And rap only fulfills one of these, the rhythm section. And so it's not actually a form of music, it's a form of rhythmic speaking.
This argument is actually very old. It echoes a 1918 article entitled Jazz and Jazzism, which rails against the dangers of jazz.
Jazz is the brotherhood of those who, devoid of harmonic and even of melodic instinct, love to fairly wallow in noise. It is a manifestation of a low streak in man's taste that has not yet come out in civilization's wash.
I'll take that as a badge of honor. Now, we could show that Black American music like jazz and hip-hop do indeed use melody and harmony, but we don't even need to do that to show that Ben Shapiro's argument isn't great.
Yeah, you could listen to, I don't know if this is exactly what's going to come next, but like any very complicated, sometimes I use the term polyrhythmic, when polyrhythmic just means you have multiple rhythms that clash together and make like a cool noise. So for instance, like this could be like 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, and this could be like 3, like 1, 2, 3, 2, 2, 3, do, do, do. Right now, sometimes you can have things where it's like I don't even know how you would count it. Like if I just do 1 and 2, and it doesn't make sense. But you can like play rhythms against each other to produce like cool sounds. I think this is it. Like where you're playing like different rhythms against each other and you get like, oh, like this is an interesting noise. Have you ever listened to like prog rock or whatever? That's not a polyrhythm? Wait, 2 against 3 wouldn't be considered a polyrhythm? Sid Machinery? Wait, what do you mean? It's like the most basic polyrhythm in the world. What do you mean? It's absolutely polyrhythmic. It would, but what you just did... Oh, maybe I might be doing it wrong. I think this is it, isn't it? Isn't this 2 against 3? You're doing it? Yeah, okay, fuck you. Anyway, yeah. I don't know if he uses pitched instruments in his kit. Like, so this isn't music to Ben Shapiro. Even though the guy's white, it still can't be music, Ben? Like, it's rhythm, not music? It's just wiggly air? Is this not music? The ending of Whiplash?
Just to annoy you. Technically all frequencies are a pitch. So all of these examples do have some form of harmony. Ha ha ha.
Well, depending on how well, would you call... What is the... So, okay, so one quick thing. When you talk about pitched instruments in reference to percussion, I think usually you're talking about like a keyboard of some type. Now that might be chimes or like a glockenspiel or a marimba or a xylophone, but usually you're talking about some sort of like an instrument, not just that like, oh, when I hit my drum, the head is tuned to B flat. Usually when you talk about pitches. Now, everything has a pitch, by definition. Anything that makes vibrations in the air, the vibration is a pitch. Would it be considered harmony though? I think, is harmony just 2 notes together? I feel like there has to be some function for it to be considered harmony, right? But thank you for the physics answer. Timpani? Is it timpani or timpani? I feel like in high school we called them timpani, but now every time I see it, it's actually written timpani.
Let's say, hypothetically,
So let's say, for the sake of argument,
there was a Ben Shapiro in a society that framed African ideas of music as objective knowledge. In this case, his
music theorist father who went to music school
went to the kind of music school that Kofi Agawu described. In this case, Ben Shapiro would not consider Bach chorales to be music because you couldn't
Especially a lot of the early monophonic fucking, yeah.
Dance to them. Dance is an essential quality of music.
Oh no, I wasn't even thinking of that. I was thinking if you go to like really, really early forms of chant, like I'm pretty sure Gregorian chant by definition lacks harmony. What did Ben Shapiro say you needed? You needed harmony, rhythm, and something else, but they lacked harmony because they were monophonic. Mono meaning one, phonic meaning like musical note. They were one note, as opposed to polyphonic music that developed. Oh, melody. I guess technically anything sung has a melody, right? Would you just consider it the melody? Would you consider Gregorian chant like a melody? But yeah. Yeah, I don't know if Gregorian chants have fixed rhythm. They must have some director to keep them in sync, but...
Music, as everybody knows, as neuroscience proves, and so Bach chorales objectively are not music. Argument.
I think it would be more, I think you could frame like other things that we would consider music to be not music using definition, be more powerful, but I understand what this guy's getting at, yeah.
Doesn't really make sense. It's a bad argument, but it's no worse than Ben's 100-year-old racist view on black music.
Much to my disappointment, there are still people in music theory, I wouldn't say who are white supremacist adjacent. They still believe it. They know they can't say it.
You'll very often see articles where Western music theory is framed as a tool for proving a piece of music's worth. That piece that we checked out at the beginning about Lady Gaga argues for Lady Gaga's genius using music theory and uses the stylistic practice of white Europeans as evidence of genius, like the raised leading tone. I'm honestly not sure how this is evidence of transcendence for a fun, popular song, but okay. Another article from the same author argues,
the reason Teenage Dream went to #1 and remains in radio rotation is that it's a textbook example of the excellence and supremacy of the rules of Western music theory.
Oh, cringe. This feels like every Vox music video I've ever fucking seen on explaining music. Oh god, what a cringe article.
So, yeah, it's right there. You don't actually have to look very far for evidence of white supremacy in music theory. William O'Hara points out that these kinds of articles, these think pieces, frame music theory as a kind of hidden knowledge that you can use to identify genius. O'Hara parallels this practice to the work of Heinrich Schenker, who used his theories of analysis in the early 20th century.
This is what you spend your first 17 years in music theory on, is Schenkerian analysis in order to understand how pieces are put together.
As a means of identifying genius in the works of Beethoven and Bach. Part 5/7, flat 9, sharp 9, flat 13. Heinrich Schenker, I guess.
If Beethoven is our exemplar for a music composer, Schenker is our exemplar for a music theorist.
Heinrich Schenker, 1868 to 1935, arguably the most influential music theorist in American music theory.
So in the United States, if you want to get a graduate degree in music theory, I know there are tens of you got to study the theories of Heinrich Schenker. American music theory has very deep Schenkerian roots. David Carson Berry traces the popularity of Schenker's ideas of music in America for a desire in the 1930s for more objective musical criticism, which bears more than a little similarity to pop culture think pieces which appeal to the supremacy of the rules of Western music theory today. They're both born from Schenkerian ideals.
He came up with ideas about how the structure of music theory plays out, from a background structure to then a middle ground structure and a foreground structure. So this background structure came in only a couple of varieties. It essentially had a motion from a tonic to a dominant to a tonic chord that could play out in 2 bars, or it could play out in 200 bars or 500 bars in a movement by Beethoven or Mozart.
Schenkerian analysis has a unique form of musical notation that attempts to identify the deep structure of what Schenker considered the great works of tonal music, what Schenker called the ersatz, the sound of scale degree 3 resolving to scale degree 2 resolving to scale degree 1. In other words, at their fundamental level, all great works of music are 3 blind mice. This is a bit of an oversimplification, but honestly, not that much.
He had a very short list of great composers. They were, of course, all white men. They were 11, I think some people say 12 in number. All German speaking except for 2, Chopin, who was a Pole, and Domenico Scarlatti, who was Italian.
If you want to learn Schenkerian analysis,
my name is Dr. Jacob Gran.
I highly recommend Dr. Jacob Gran's videos on YouTube.
He drew heavily on 18th century theories of melody.
When you watch these videos, though, you start to realize that the concept of figured bass is absolutely essential in understanding Schenkerian analysis, as well as the idea of continuo. It becomes clearer why there is figured bass everywhere in all of our music theory textbooks. It's because it's all a system designed to teach Schenkerian ideas from the ground up. It's actually pretty explicit in the preface to this book, Harmony and Voice Leading. This book reflects the theoretical and analytic approach of Heinrich Schenker. The book will provide a valuable preparation for the later study of Schenkerian analysis. The problem is that Schenker is not useful in understanding any other style of music besides Western classical music. You can't do Schenker to Meshuggah, for example.
Or any classical voice leading principles, or any, it's very strange that, like, as music progressed from time period to time period to time period, like, people kept breaking more and more rules because they wanted to make cooler music. But then when you go to study music, you learn things like Schenkerian analysis, like this is how music must be arranged. Although, again, any teacher you have, if they're a good teacher, should be honest with you and tell you, like, you're not going to use Schenkerian analysis to understand, like, why the Beatles sounds like the Beatles, or why Tool sounds like Tool, or why Radiohead sounds like Radiohead. Like, it has its limits. It's only useful for studying, like 18th and 19th century harmony. Like, and past that, it just doesn't do much.
Or James Brown, or Anuja Kamat's music. And even within the Western canon, Schenker does not do a very good job of explaining rhythm, or timbre, or any other musical element. Dance, if we're going to adopt the African worldview. We've built music theory from the very ground up with the idea that the only music worth analyzing and worth having a language of analysis for is the music that this mustache liked to analyze. And if you can't analyze music through his theories, then it isn't music. It's not worthy of your time. It's inferior. You can't do music theory to it. This is the legacy of Ben Shapiro and his
music theorist father who went to music school.
Western music theory has developed a language that attempts to show white culture's superiority over non-white cultures under the guise of objective analysis. It's all a system designed to show white supremacy over non-white culture. And if you think that's me being hyperbolic or speculative, no, that's exactly what Schenker set out to do with his theory of music.
He said very explicitly, I think of music like I think of people. I have a unified worldview. There's a hierarchy. White people are at the top. There's a hierarchy. The foreground is at the top. Also, the 11 or 12 composers are clearly at the top. And then he always used the word genius. Genius was code for white. It was also code for German.
In his essay, Schenker the Regressive, the conductor Leon Botstein would write,
The fact that Schenker, an observant and active member of the official religious Viennese Jewish community, adhered to these views and propagated them indicates how deep-seated was the sense of German cultural superiority within German-speaking Europe and how widely it was internalized.
So the most controversial part is not saying that Schenker praised Hitler in a letter to his pupil Felix Eberhard von Kuba in May of 1933, 4 months after Hitler ascended to the chancellery. It's not that Schenker said, the Jews are the greatest enemies to Germany, and he was Jewish himself. It's not that he said, even Negroes think that they can govern themselves. No, it's not that he said these horrible things that that the white race must annihilate these Japanese animals because they're Japanese. No, it's not that he said all of those things. No one's going to dispute that. That's all out there.
Karl Schachter, the guy who co-wrote this harmony textbook that we keep referencing, wrote that for Schenker, both his political and musical ideas were armaments in a cultural struggle that would eventually lead to a regeneration of both music and society at large in the German-speaking world. Whew, okay. Now things are getting serious. Music theory's intellectual framework is built on Germany's cultural struggle of the 1930s. That's good. Karl Schachter continues. Schenker believed that an aristocracy of some sort, at least in cultural matters, if not also in political structure, would promote the selection and support of gifted individuals among whom the rare genius might emerge. That he was altogether wrong in this last view, I'm not prepared to say. Wait a second. Schachter agrees with Schenker. Are music theorists... Is music theory like a...
Our roots are white supremacist. We have created racist policies based on that simple racist idea that whites are superior.
Dr. Ewell is not the first person to suggest that ignoring Schenker's racist ideas is not an option. Leon Botstein would also say in his essay,
Schenker's notion of superior culture as an instrument for civilizing the rest of the world, when placed in the context of such forceful prejudices and contempt, demands scrutiny.
I have taught Schenkerian analysis. I know it very well. Always got A's, always liked it, and I completely shoved it all under the carpet for my career. That was a bitter pill for me to swallow. Think of how hard it is for someone to swallow who's invested way more than I have, and there are many. The people who have devoted their careers, their energy, their toil to a field don't want to see it uprooted. They don't want to see their work undone. It's very difficult for that person to look into a mirror and say, race exists, whiteness exists, we've been rooted in pushing whiteness, and whiteness has had the leg up this whole time. And there have been other non-white groups who have been greatly disadvantaged.
Part 6 minor. No, really, music theory is really racist. I interviewed Dr. Ewell back in early July, and since that interview took place, there has been some, shall we say, music theory that has happened. After his speech at SMT, the Journal of Schenkerian Studies at the University of North Texas published 15 papers in a symposium response that Dr. Ewell was not invited to participate in. Now, some of these papers were half-assed, to say the least. One was just a short paragraph, and one was somehow published anonymously, which is strange. Probably the worst offender in laziness, though, comes from a professor at the University of North Texas named Timothy Jackson, who quotes at length from the Wikipedia article on misogyny in rap music for some reason. I guess because Dr. Ewell isn't white, accuses Dr. Ewell of black anti-Semitism and also of not bringing blacks up to standard, and also patronizingly dismiss.
Wait, what? Hold on. Why then are there so few black professors of music theory in American universities? Is it because of a conspiracy by racist Schenkerians practicing their inherently racist analytical methodology? As Ewell only attacks Schenker as a pretext to introduce his main argument that liberalism is a racist conspiracy to deny rights to people of color. He's uninterested in bringing blacks up to standard so they can compete. Holy shit, Ewell. Oh, sorry. Bringing blacks up to standard. How mad. Well, I guess maybe they don't see it that way. But something that's kind of funny, I brought this up a few times. All of America's most important contributions to music in the world have come from black people, which is interesting.
The most important musical contributions that America has made to the world, like the origins of like rock and roll and rap and blues, like a lot of these things were inspired by African Americans, which are not European. This is literally some of America's most important contributions to the world musically. If you want to take some weird Ben Shapiro argument, which seems strange for you to do, about how rap isn't music, I mean, we can debate objectively like what you consider music. I guess we can talk about that, or we can talk about whether or not like music that comes after other music is like an update of it. I don't know if anybody would argue that romantic music is superior to classical music, or that impressionist music or serialism is superior to what came before it. Those are just ridiculous. Like, you're begging the question when you say things like, is rap better than classical music? This doesn't make sense. It's not how you analyze art or music.
Would you put Moby Dick in the same category as Harry Potter?
I wouldn't, that they're both literature. Yeah, they're literature.
Do you think people are going to be reading Harry Potter 100 years from now like we read Moby Dick?
Nobody listens to opera now, dog. Literally, nobody cares about opera. What do you mean?
Listen.
What? Wait, no, wait. You're telling me like it's important to see what people are currently listening to? Do you think people are walking into opera houses? Ironically enough, the only people that do are probably the Jewish people that I'm sure you're going to spend the majority of this podcast attacking. Like, come on, dude. Who seriously is blasting classical music and their fucking Ford Focuses, like driving down the street in their Honda Civics? Like, come on. You're not seriously going to make this argument to me.
Is jazz a derivative, a lower derivative of the waltz?
What do you mean a lower derivative?
It's a simplification and a Judaized version of the waltz.
No,
it's the
there's
waltz
nothing
without the order.
Waltzes are incredibly simplistic, harmonically speaking, compared to the rich textures that you can find in jazz. I mean, like, what are you talking about?
Come on.
Come on. No, hold on. I'm going to be fair to you. I think
there's no order. There's no order to jazz music.
What do you mean by order? Define order.
Jazz music is not ordered like music.
What do you mean by order? Define order.
It's made up on the go.
No, it's not.
Jazz music is made up on the go. That's why it sounds so stupid.
What are you talking about?
Jazz music is all.
That's not. First of all, it's not
atonal.
It's not atonal either. There's a tonal center to the majority of jazz music, and it's not made up on the go. Jazz music is highly structured. Maybe you're mistakenly referring to the idea that there are improvisation sections to a lot of jazz music, but guess what? To a lot, yes, a lot of the class. If you've actually listened, right. Well, no. Having improvisational sections doesn't mean it's made up on the go. And also, a lot of classical music had improvisational sections as well, but people that listen to it, like you, that don't actually understand the origins of it, don't know that. A lot of the repeated passages that you hear in classical music, in the past, piano players would have actually been expected to improvise new passages there. But it doesn't happen anymore because classical music is seen as more of a museum than an actual modern day, like, evolution of music. So if you want to say that improvisation means that there's an order to it, that doesn't even work for you.
What are the foundations of American culture? Whether it's music, whether it's the crappy I don't like the liberal philosophy, but the philosophy of the United States was not created by African philosophers. It was created by European philosophers during the Enlightenment. Okay.
Now, before you answer,
fathers, go ahead.
Before you answer, Destiny, before you answer, I just want to say this. Somebody in chat said the real JQ is the jazz question. Go ahead.
So Stryker's American, right?
Yes.
Okay. Yes. That I'm just saying because I don't know what your health insurance is like. We don't have Medicare for all here. That pivot was actually so extreme. I'm worried you're going to injure yourself. So slow down, okay? If you want to talk about like foundations of like,
if you want to talk about, why are you attacking me personally? I'm trying to have an adult conversation with you. You would not be talking to me like this in person. So I appreciate it if you just talk to me and we can exchange ideas like two fucking adults.
So I live in LA. Ralph has been here. If you want to set up a real life debate, I'll do it any day of the week. Okay? I'm talking to people that are bigger and scarier than you. Okay?
I'm not going to LA right now.
Okay, that's fine. But don't sit here and pretend like I wouldn't talk to you in person. Like you're some big scary fucking dude. Okay?
You wouldn't be snarking and insulting me.
If somebody were to legitimately say to me, like in a straight face, to try to imply to me that jazz has no order, I would be just as snarky. It is a hilariously stupid fucking point. Rap and hip hop, jazz, rock and roll, like things that are considered classically black and classically American forms of music, like, came from black people. Like,
This is the work of black musicians.
We can listen to their music with pleasure even if they aren't the supreme geniuses on the level of the greatest classical composers.
It's mostly an unhinged racist tirade, but more importantly, this guy quoted from Wikipedia.
Wait, is rock and roll considered black? Absolutely. Absolutely. Find me, literally link me any classic rock and roll song, and it's going to have this blues chord progression in it. Fuck. Like every single rock song ever. What I just played, that's 12-bar blues. This is literally just 12-bar blues. Every single classic rock song in the world uses 12-bar blues. Like literally. Fuck. I can't play it on the computer. But like you can hear it, right? Do 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 do. Like literally every single old rock song, every single old rock and roll song in the fucking world plays like 12-bar blues. So yeah, rock and roll is very much like there's a reason why people say that Elvis stole it from black people.
Not to belabor this point, but can you imagine citing Wikipedia in a term paper or a thesis or dissertation? Like, does your teacher let you do that? Like, no, you don't. You don't do that, dude. Why the hell would we take you seriously? People were pissed and signed a letter that Timothy Jackson should probably be held to the same level of academic competence that high schoolers are, and also maybe not be such a racist douchebag personally to Dr. Ewell. And for some reason, Fox News decided that this would be part of the culture war now, as well as the National Review, who described Timothy Jackson's paper as
serious critique of that scholar's work, based on archival research within his highly specialized field, and after lifelong study of Schenker specifically, and music theory more generally.
Again.
Okay.
Wikipedia. The very first thing that you see when you type in, is Wikipedia a reliable source, is Wikipedia telling you that it is not a reliable source.
I heard the quote where blacks have to, you got to raise blacks up to standards so they can compete, which I'm like, oh my God, you couldn't even say that in like 1970.
The unfortunate side effect of the cartoonish levels of racism coming out of the University of North Texas this month is that this whole thing has turned into a referendum on Heinrich Schenker, who, one, you probably just heard of today, and two, was just some racist anti-Semitic guy living in Europe at the turn of the 20th century, and let's be honest, he was not unique in that regard. The fact that Fox News desperately wants to turn this into cancel culture run amok is just stupid.
Phil wants to quote-unquote cancel Schenker. I don't, never said it, kind of said exactly the opposite at the end of my long article. Phil wants us to throw away Schubert and never play Schubert anymore. Nope, never said it, wouldn't say it. Schubert was a very interesting composer. I like quite a bit of his music. It's not about canceling anybody. It's about addressing difficult issues directly, forthrightly. We're going to talk about it openly. We're going to talk about white supremacy, the roots in white supremacy. I mean, that's a statement of fact. It's not under question.
Yeah.
Music theory is historically rooted in white supremacy. The music theorists said it themselves in the 19th century, quite openly. It wasn't a secret. It only became a secret when white supremacy became untenable in the mid-20th century. You couldn't be white supremacist anymore. It had to go underground.
That's what you think.
So if you consider high culture in a different category,
what does high culture mean to you? Why is that music high culture?
You don't know what great literature is. What is the canon of great literature?
No. Let's talk about music. Why do you think some music is high culture compared to other music? I'm curious.
You said what is high culture? then I give you an example. You say no. Let's talk about music.
Well, because we're talking about music, and you are bringing it up in relation to music, so I want to talk about music. So tell me, what does high culture music mean to you? I'm curious.
High culture is classical music. It's stuff like that.
Why? What makes it high culture?
What do you mean? What makes it high culture?
You realize that every argument you're giving now, that in like the romantic
music,
era,
that if you train your ear to listen to it, and it's almost like eating food, right? If you spend your whole life eating SpaghettiOs, you probably can't enjoy a better meal. right? Because your
If
palate
this is the argument that you
trained.
want to make, you
so you
realize-
have to train a man's palate for classical music in some cases.
No, you don't. Most
and
classical,
we don't do
no,
that in
This
this
is
in this
not
country.
true. I encourage anybody right now listening to go and download any number of Mozart or even Haydn pieces. You can understand these and listen to these immediately. They're just boring.
Do you think they're great?
No,
Oh,
they're boring.
You find them boring? Okay.
Of course. Compared to
I
the
mean,
type of music that we have
problem
available
is-
today, the selection
problem
of
is
instruments, our harmonic vocabulary has massively expanded compared to what they had in the 1800s and in the 1900s. Yeah, of course.
Massively expanded. So like some black guy talking fast over a 4/4 beat is considered massive
Is
expansion.
every beat just a four? What do you think are the rhythms of most like classical songs? You talk about waltzes. Do you think the rhythms there in a waltz is complicated? Like what you're making
What
fun
I'm
of
saying-
a 4/4 beat? Like wow, you've got 3/4 and 6/8. Like oh, it's so much more complicated. Like,
What I'm saying is that what you say is an expansion. It's true that 4/4 beats were common in classical music, but there's also different other types of tempo. The point I'm making is that within the classical realm, there are many different types of doing classical music. You know, how many times? I mean, why do you think rock music is like basically played out now? Like people don't listen to rock music anymore.
what are you
Part of
talking
it-
about? Progressive rock had like a pretty massive upswing
Sure,
in like the early 2000s.
I'm not.
Sure, like,
listen. Stop being pedantic. You know what
I'm
I
not
mean.
being pedantic,
Turn on
you're
the
just
you
making
turn
it-
on the radio.
Oh, you want to
All right,
on
look.
the radio.
We can talk about music all show, and I actually didn't stop it because I'm entertained by this. Other people.
Well, sure. I just so like
maybe.
I'm
Yeah.
happy
Okay,
that we
we'll
opened.
finish-
let's
Sure, I'm happy
finish
that we
up this segment. is
Yeah,
what
I
I'm saying.
understand.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm happy that we opened with this topic so that I kind of have like an understanding of how absolutely disingenuous like every other cultural argument is going to be. Like this, like for anybody that's listening that has any musical background at all, everything you said is laughable. Like you talk about the necessity to train an ear to hear something. The amount of ear training required to follow like Coltrane's later pieces versus like fucking Mozart pieces is hilarious. Like you need so much more ear training to follow any complicated jazz composition. Like the harmonies in that are almost impossible to follow versus classical music. Like that's hilarious.
Part 7 diminished. Coda. So where do we begin here? Well, the first step is in acknowledging that music theory is profoundly Eurocentric and white racially framed, and we already kind of have done that. In the beginning of this video, I asked you to replace the phrase music theory in popular media with the harmonic style of 18th century European musicians, and hopefully that got your wheels turning a little bit. Now, sometimes people genuinely are not referring to that style when they say music theory, but more often than not, they actually are. There's nothing wrong with the harmonic style of 18th century European musicians. I like the music of Bach, it's a big part of me. That does not mean that it has to be the default. The music theory of Heinrich Schenker also might be very useful in understanding the music of Bach and Mozart and Beethoven, and honestly, the musical notation looks freaking sweet. But that doesn't mean that his worldview has to be the default. And in fact, let's not adopt any of his worldview, please. So this video is already way too long, but I do want to mention a couple of things that have been glaringly omitted from the script so far. The first thing, of course, is the relationship of music theory to class. It costs money to go to music school, and not everybody has the ability to go to music school, the place where you learn this harmonic style of 18th century European musicians, and so knowledge of music theory can be kind of a class signifier. In the United States, anyway, the relationship between class and race is very clear, so this white racial frame of music theory affects class as well. Now, you might notice also that I've been talking about the United States primarily in this video, which is rather ironic in a video about the Eurocentrism of music theory, but I can only personally speak to my experience. And in my experience, I did not learn the music of Beethoven through the lens of Barry Harris and George Russell, people of color. Instead, I learned figured bass, which is all a system designed to teach Schenkerian analysis, which was a theory explicitly designed to teach German cultural supremacy. I didn't learn the basics of Ottoman or North Indian or Japanese or African music theory as a foil to Western theory, and I certainly did not learn how to dance in music school. I don't imagine my teachers were explicitly white supremacist in their view of music theory. Well, most of them anyway, but that doesn't mean that the system itself that they had to work with wasn't structurally biased towards the harmonic style of 18th century European musicians. And that's what makes racism structural. Sorry to bring in the critical race theory, by the way. I know if you're watching this now, you might be on some kind of future blacklist for anti-American activities.
I wish that more people understood this. It's like something that nobody understands anymore. Structural and systemic racism exists because it doesn't require individual bad actors. When you say things like all cops are racist and that's why the police force is racist, you literally don't understand what you're talking about. You literally are not understanding critical race theory. You literally are not understanding like anything having to do with systemic or structural racism. Like this is not true. If every single individual cop was racist, we wouldn't need systemic racism. We would just have racism. Like we don't need the system or the structure. We literally have the people to do it. The whole reason why systemic or structural racism exists and is so powerful and pervasive is because it doesn't require racist people in order for it to work.
But here we are, everybody. Institutional racism is a bitch, and music theory plays a part of it. Here is me eating Fritos.
Wait, why? Oh, wait, I want to join. Hold on.
Governor Ricketts directed health measures. We anticipate our guests' desire to celebrate all of the life's events they missed over the past 3 months. New babies, birthdays, anniversaries, retirements, with our ultimate hope that it will transform into a